Welcome to this version of the Memory Team weekly meeting. It is November 23rd. Got a not verbalized item or two on there. We can go back to what Fabian is typing. Note, I will be out after Tuesday for the rest of the week. There's US holiday. I forget Wednesday is Friends and Family Day. Then Thursday is Thanksgiving for us, and I'm not going to come back on Friday, so I'm just going to take Friday off. So, yeah. Team topics. So the 13.6 retro is out. I think it was published on Thursday of last week. We had some feedback and action items from the last retro. So the big one for this one, for 13.6 and going forward, is voting on topics so that we make sure we actually make our retros useful. So sometimes people put all of their comments about the retro into one, and it make it hard. It will make it difficult to vote on topics if you just bundle everything up into one comment. So if you have different topics to talk about, please break them out into different comments so that we can vote on them and have follow-up items from the retro. And in a week or two, I will summarize what the action items are, and we can follow up on them. Let's see. So next topic is the 2 gig sync week. So I caught up on all the videos as of Friday, and it seems like there is some confidence level that we can run on 2 gigs. And Camille, you got some comments there? Verbalize?
Yes, so like it requires a lot of tuning, but it seems like doable. There are still like, it's kind of short a little on the resources. So it's kind of like you're kind of trading. It's still like you require this swap, but like from like different tests, like with different improvements, it seems that it should be able to run. But there is like caveats, like because we use swap, it would require like pretty fast SSD baked swap. It's kind of like rule outs like Raspberry Pi 2G, but I think like there is like in general it seems possible to run in the 2G without a swap, but it requires a little more like investigation on like further optimizations. So I pointed out like maybe like the major aspects, maybe like in the ordering of the. I think my understanding like of the like how things are like low-hanging fruit. Maybe the low-hanging fruit are the first one. I don't know, Matthias, about like that question, but like if we talk about running like with the 2G, it seems doable. It's connected with some caveats. But if we are talking about like 2G with the Raspberry Pi, it's slightly harder story because of the swap not being so effective then. But like I think in general, like it's fully achievable, like to run GitLab today on the 2G. Of course, like scaling the limits, responses, architecture size to this memory constraint that we would have.
Okay. Sounds like we have some ideas, but do we have like an approach or a plan? Do we have representative issues on what we're doing next? I know in the videos that were talked about, there were some low-hanging fruits that we could attack to reduce the memory footprint, but do we have an overall idea or approach to get down to 2 gigs or whatever the ultimate footprint will be?
I'm not sure if we have like all the issues created and scored like to the next items. I don't think that like, because this is like the next steps, the low-hanging fruit, I don't think that we did go through all of that like data to summarize that properly. I kind of think that this would be like the kind of like the conclusion of our like 2 gig week, to kind of like gather all the data, gather like presume memory benefits and score that with the complexity and like the benefit. So to answer correct to your question, I think like we miss like this final dot on I after this 2 gig, like to kind of like summarize the whole experiment. at this moment. I'm kind of thinking that like we have a bunch of these topics that are open, that have pretty raw nodes, but I don't think that like we kind of summarize these.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think the high level takeaway was that there's 3 avenues we can pursue. The first one is not running things that we're currently running by default. And I think that needs product input because it comes with some drawbacks. Like if we don't run Prometheus by default, we will not by default collect usage ping metrics for topology, for instance. So there's a bunch of product trade-offs. Then the second one is not loading things that we might not need. That's more of a technical lever because like Nicola already looked into this. We can save some, I think it was like 15 meg or something like that by not loading any GraphQL stuff, which we don't need in Sidekick or non-API nodes. And then the third approach is to tune stuff, like the very deep down technical stuff, you know, like tuning the memory allocator, the GC. And yeah, like, actually, maybe there's a fourth, which was like, or maybe that is a part of all of these, which is looking at kind of the data in memory. You know, it's not so much like the feature we run or the code we load, but it's also just data in memory where like we're not convinced we always need that. But yeah, maybe that's like included in these other things. But I think these are the main 3 avenues, and yeah.
So I'm kind of thinking that like I agree with like one addition. Probably like the lowest long-hanging fruit is like the tuning what we have today. The second, probably low-hanging fruit with maybe not a big effort is like running in the Puma single. Because like I think like we noticed that this kind of gives a lot of like room. I think it was something like 250 megabytes or 300 megabytes better. And like everything else is really like maybe like disabling the processes that we may not want to run, which is like GitLab exporter. But everything after that is really like optimizing the application code base, not loading GraphQL, not loading some parts of the code base, which are kind of significantly harder and require more effort. But I think like the general conclusion that I got from the Friday meeting is like that all of this selective loading is kind of connected with maybe the bigger story, maybe like the complete architecture overview, like how we load the GitHub. Can we make it more selective? Can we build like the guidelines to make developers to be able to like to decide in what context they want the application to be loaded? And like I think that GraphQL that pop up as something the easiest like to try out like how this architecture could look like. And it seems that the GraphQL gives like pretty noticeable benefit of like 15, 20 megabytes, right?
Yeah.
So this is like 20 megabytes less on the side key process, basically.
Yeah, and it's interesting that we are loading like more than 1,200 files less than before, only by disabling the GraphQL.
So it also has the impact on the like the time needed to load the application.
Yes, that's true.
So on the Puma question, running in single mode, would that be just for the smaller instances, or would we want to switch to Puma running in single mode for every installation?
No, just for smaller ones.
Okay.
It comes with a performance implication, right? Because
Right.
we're not gonna be as effectively using the multi-threaded nature of Puma, because it will only be a single process.
Yes, I think like correct. Also, there is like this unanswered question, like how you run Puma in the cloud native. Do you run like with multiple workers, or do we want to run in the Puma single? Right now we run in the multiple workers, so I think the answer is like as Matthias. Basically, I think that this is mostly affecting single, the smaller installs.
Actually, like now that you mentioned this is a really interesting point, because I was surprised to see, not because I just hadn't thought about it, but like when I saw how we scale Puma in for .com in Kubernetes, we actually run, it's very different from the VMs. Like with the VMs, we run like a smaller number of nodes, which with a lot more processes per node, and I think also more threads per process. So whereas in Kubernetes, we run like smaller machines, but we'd run a lot more. So that would be a pod, right? The unit of scale. But we run a lot more pods, but only I think with like 2 workers per pod. I can go back and double check. So they're only like much smaller than how we.
Yes, but like there is another aspect that like we didn't really ever yet look at that because it has the noticeable impact on the memory usage for the cloud native. And like I guess like the current model when you run multiple forks is basically more memory efficient than like 2 workers basically. So I'm kind of like, this is interesting, something for us to look at as well. Like,
yeah,
what is like this, like the boundary for the cloud native? Like, how many workers we should be running?
Because
to have pretty reasonable memory usage, but also have pretty reasonable like performance.
Yeah, and I would be interested in understanding what is the overhead that we pay per pod, because I think it is in theory like thinkable that we could run Puma in single mode and then we double the number of pods. You know, it's an option, right? I don't know if that is feasible actually in practice, but like if the scheduling and the resource, like the bare metal resource overhead for running all these extra pods is small, this can have a big benefit, which is it's much easier to scale at the pod level, because this is just something you tell the Kubernetes orchestration level how you want your service scaled, and it will go ahead and do that because it keeps running this control loop. Whereas if you scale at the app server level, you need to actually deploy a configuration change. You need to deploy a change of the Helm charts and then redeploy, which is not a responsive way of scaling a service.
I mean, probably like I think the way how I see it, like you can expect that. Let's assume that like regardless on amount of the workers, you can assume that each pod requires 1 gig of the memory, plus like very small amount on top of for each worker. So I kind of thinking that like maybe if you run Puma single, it's still gonna be 1 gig. If you run Puma cluster with 2 workers, you have basically twice the capacity, but it's still gonna be around 1 gig. If you run the 4, probably it's gonna be 1.2 gigs, but like you have 4 times the capacity. So
so it sounds like we're getting deep into some implementation details.
Yeah, sorry.
Great, but we have a couple of issues in here that cover like some of the next steps in LowHanging Fruit, but it sounds like we need to spend some more time on this. Does that?
I think those are mostly, we created these issues to track the investigation. I don't think, most of these are not like, let's do this as like an actionable outcome thing.
Oh,
so I think we should, I mean, we wanted to maximize our time in actually hands-on, like doing stuff and poking at things. So I think we do need to still create proper issues for, these are the things we identified we think make sense to work on. And because some of them do require product input as well, and then let's create those or convert those that are already in pretty good shape too, and then we can maybe track them. Do you want them to? Should we track them in the same epic, or would you say that should I go elsewhere?
That's a good question. Probably throw them in the same epic for now. I don't see the need to create another one. I mean, we can reorganize later or create an implementation epic. What about, does it need to happen synchronously? It kind of seems like maybe that might be more useful instead of people dividing and conquering, because there might be some overlap on issue creation. We have the normally scheduled memory team office hours tomorrow, which I just noticed Fabian is not invited to. I will add you on there, Fabian.
Oh, okay. I mean, yeah, maybe we can just create a bunch of bare bones, just like, you know, skeleton issues together, just so that we're all in agreement on what should be looked at or done. And then, but maybe we can split them up among us and take that async to actually like, flesh these out.
Yeah.
I think that makes sense. May I also ask a couple of questions? from my end, because I was not part of it, and I probably still have to do a little bit of reading to understand the details, but just so that I have this correct in my head. So essentially what the investigation revealed is that there is some opportunity for tuning how the application works. And that does not require removing any functionality. It just essentially means we handle what we have slightly differently to reduce the overall memory footprint. That may have impact on the startup time, for example. And you could argue that the tuning will also affect larger installations, to some extent, right? They may be more noticeable on small ones, but it has, overall, we will be more efficient in how we handle the our GitLab as a whole. Is that correct so far?
Yes, although I'm not sure if tuning alone will be enough to actually go below that 2 GB limit.
Sure.
I don't know what you think, Camille. It sounds like so far there's no single big chunky thing we can do, that will significantly take us under that limit. And also, this is also maybe a segue into the next question there. We need to talk about, even if we make this now, right? I mean, we have this interesting graph from our topology ping, usage ping, where we can see that every GitLab iteration that we release every month, we have been growing our total RSS. So we're currently on a upward trend trajectory with total memory use. So the question is also, how much runway do we have? If we do all these things, are we gonna doing the same? Are we gonna have another 1 week, 2 GB session, I don't know, in 6 months time, because we will, because GitLab will be that much bigger again, right?
No, and I mean, this.
Yeah, so probably it's not gonna be 2 gig, but 4 gigs week session. Yeah.
So Matthias, is that dashboard the place we should look for now in absence of anything else? Because I have that question next. How do we monitor this going forward?
Yeah, let me find this real quick. It's Chinyu created this. It's great. Let me find, or maybe it was Josh, but let me find it.
Yeah, it was Chinyu.
Okay, and then another follow-up question from me would be, essentially, and I think that is maybe the gist of it. We grow memory because we add more stuff, right? And if you if you start shipping more and more things with GitLab, right? I've heard about another database that we're going to add, and you have Prometheus and all of these services. We are going to grow, and so the other maybe more radical solution is just to disable certain things and say, if you do not need it, right, then this will not be available, but that saves you some RAM, right? I think the question there is if that is desirable, right? As in, do we want to do that, right? Because that is going to mean that certain functionalities are no longer available, right? And I think
I want to qualify this a little bit, because it doesn't mean they need to be entirely unavailable. I would maybe say we could look at turning them off by default with the option to turning them back on, right? Like in Omnibus, you can already toggle all these things on and off. It's just a bunch of them are turned on by default. And I'm not totally sure if we're if all these users even need them to be turned on at all times. Maybe some users are not even aware of running GitLab Exporter or make no use of it. And then we are running an extra Puma instance on their machines that they don't use. And as long as we have clear language in the UI, I guess, to inform the admins that, look, this is not currently running. If you need it, you need to turn it on, but it will cost you, a bit of extra memory. Then maybe we can just be in a better default position. And maybe they can then get there by adding more swap or more memory things.
I think this relates kind of, and that's maybe a little bit of a loaded question. I don't mean it in that way. So given we do all of those things, right? We disable certain bits, right? We tune, and all of a sudden we run on 2 GB of memory. What will that actually do to the user experience? Is it going to be just as good as it is now, or will it actually will it be one of those things? Well, it runs, but it's actually either still slow, right, or certain significant parts of the application are no longer available because you can't make use of them. And I'm just wondering what's sort of the feeling, because I would argue that reducing it for the sake of reduction, but then the user experience is not actually, you know, like good, then what's the point, right? And I think this is why I may be a little bit more flexible with regards to this limit, but I'm not quite sure. That's really just my sort of looking at it from afar.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, those are perfectly fair points, and that's exactly why I also think we need to look at this from a product lens, right? I totally agree. And we like as a team during last week, we have not thought about this a lot, right? I mean, yeah.
No, and that's not no criticism at all of this effort, right? It's
no, I didn't. Yeah, no, I totally agree though. Like this is a great question. We need to look at it. Yeah. Feature by
almost
feature.
like we'd need a reference architecture for the 2 gig footprint to tell us like, you know, it'll work with this many users or this many projects or this combination of, and that's where Grant's expertise would really come into play. Because yeah, what's the use having saying we can limp along at 2 gigs, but you really can't use it. So
Fabian, like adding like to your question, because like you mentioned that like we may disable functions that are not used, and this may cripple like user experience. I don't think that we are really at this point that we need to do it. I'm kind of more like the example of Nicola of GraphQL shows that we can still free like a lot of space for adding a lot of new features for upcoming months or maybe even like multi-months by just being more selective. So yeah, I guess like the aspect that I'm seeing is like with the good architecture of like the code base, it appears that we could basically free a lot of space to be able to continue adding more functions with having exactly the same user experience, but having significantly more room as for the memory. I mean, room means like back to Matthias' question, like the current memory usage is growing.
Yes.
So this should like probably cut a little of this memory usage to like to the level maybe from 2 or 3 years ago, and we would still be growing, but maybe we'll be oscillating of the current value or significantly below the current value.
Yeah, no, I think it's a fair point. Like to me personally, I think what we want to be is we want to be sort of mindful of people's resources, you know, be as efficient as we can be. But if you add a new functionality that you think has value and that adds RAM, right, then the trade-off is what do we care more about, right? The resource usage or this feature that ideally has value, right? And you know that's obviously also a sort of a product question.
And honestly, maybe that depends on the customer, right? I mean, we have a very wide range of customers. Some companies very large, like some individual users. So I'm actually wondering if that ties all back into what we've talked about briefly like a year ago, this whole idea of a GitLab Lite. Is there any like merit in this? Maybe we need to like rekindle that discussion. And I don't know what Sid thinks about these things, you know, because I know this whole single app discussion.
Yeah, but if we are talking about, for example, this GraphQL thing, like the point is that we use that GraphQL, but we are not using it, for example, in Sidekick. So if we are selective about the functionality and don't load anything related to the GraphQL, we can save some space, but this will require a lot of architectural changes.
Yes,
so we can
but that's different. Yeah. That's a different topic though, Nicola, because I think, because we were like more talking about the product angle, but I think the GraphQL thing, we can just do that. I think that has nothing to do with like the disabling features.
Yeah, and also sorry, like because I unfortunately still need to like fix my calendar. I have a meeting at half that I need to move around. That's hard to move. But just I linked one item here with regards to sort of the product perspective on this, which I think relates to what you're doing here, which is something that was opened a week ago, which is I think a driving force behind trying to reduce the usage is the concern that there is some form of sort of low-end disruption through services like Gitty, right? As in a lighter service with significantly lower resource usage can do things that GitLab can also do, right? And so that may mean some users are actually going to choose that over us, you know, which could be a problem in the medium term, long term. As far as I know, and I have to, this is maybe one thing that I'm trying to do this week or next, is I don't think we have any kind of data that I have access to that actually says this is, you know, a thing, right? And what is the scope of this thing? And so I'm trying to dig a little bit, because my impression, and I don't know if that's true, again, I need to look, is that, for example, the perception of being lightweight, right, may have to do with resource usage, but it may also have to do with the fact that you can maybe do a significant chunk of the things that you can do in GitLab in Gitty as well, right? And you know, that works perfectly for folks, and that's good enough, right? And so this goes back to this sort of GitLab Lite question, right? If for a chunk of users, right, even with reduced functionality, right, or you know, some things that Gitty can't do that's sufficient, maybe a strategy is also to say, well, here is GitLab, right, in a smaller package, right, with only the core functionalities, right? But I'm not quite sure, you know, because people, I think they care about the user experience at the end, the things that they actually want to do with it. And if they look at this and say like, hey, I have a 60 megabyte Go blob, right, and it runs at low resource and I can do merge requests and that's all I need and issues, right? Maybe they choose it partly because of the resource usage, but they also choose it because they get their stuff done in it, right? And I don't know what like these factors actually are, because it may be that resource usage is a concern, but there are other concerns as well, right? And then the question is, okay, is this part of the market really for users who don't need all of the stuff that GitLab offers, right? And so maybe deactivating that is the way forward, because they will never be interested in, I don't know, epics, right? They don't need that, right? So I don't know.
There is one interesting like aspect of your like sentence. Like everything that we did, we tested against GitLab EE. GitLab CE is like another product that it should be smaller in terms of the memory usage. So like we didn't actually compare CE versus EE memory usage. So this CE may actually be a product that answers like your suggestion about having something that is more lightweight, basically because of the smaller package. And you also mentioned about like the perception of the lightweight. I also agree with you that this is multidimensional, but I kind of feel that like it's not only about like 2 gig limit or like amount of the resources that you use, but also about the, let's say, the complexity and amount of the components that you need to deploy.
Yes.
So it's like GitLab did grow not only of the code base, but did also grow with amount of the sibling services that it requires to run, which is like GitLab, workforce, pages. I mean, these kind of like not microservices, but still like sibling services architecture. Like if you look at even at the Omnibus and how many services it runs about, I think, 12 different services. And this for some people may be like intimidating, that I have this GitLab that runs in the Docker container. It only has 2 processes where GitLab needs, because of the usage ping and all of these different services, monitoring, scraping, requires 12 or 15 services, even though the outcome maybe, let's say, assume memory usage is very similar. So I guess, would it still be comparable if we get down to like to running on the 1 gig? We would still have many services, and it would be considered lightweight.
No, and I think this is exactly my point.
I guess it's multidimensional, really.
Exactly, and I think what I try to get at is like, if our concern is that a segment of the market, let's say, is concerned with complexity and large things that they don't like, right? What are these dimensions, right? And memory is certainly one of them, but maybe there are others, right? And we shouldn't forget it. I like in my mental model right now, and maybe completely wrong, is I thought about it as like, well, GitLab is a little bit like the Ubuntu of Linux distributions in that regard, right? It comes, you install it, and you have all of the stuff you could possibly need already pre-packaged, right? But some folks may actually want to have a more minimal installation, right? And then they choose Arch, for example, because they feel, oh, I want only the services I really need and whatnot, right? And memory usage is one dimension, but maybe there are others too. And also, you know, how many people choose one over the other and what is the market segment? I have no answers. I think this will be interesting to figure out a little bit just to help us prioritize these product questions, right? It's like maybe some of these things, the tuning, for example, in the GraphQL bit sound like sensible things to do regardless. But if we talk about turning things off, right, by default, is that something we want to do? You know, is that maybe something we want to do for CE? Is that maybe the answer? I don't know.
So should we follow along with that issue you listed below for more info on like the market feedback? I know you have to fall off, so that's why.
I have to fall off, but I'm on that because I want to understand what actually is happening there. And I will probably need to help with that a little bit, as in, okay, if it's one of those things where people say like, oh, we ought to do this, but I think it's quite relevant for the memory team and for sort of the next steps. So I'll try to figure out what we can do.
Okay. Let's see if I'll be on.
But thank you for your answers. It really helps me.
Sure.
So as far as next steps, I see Matthias, you just created an issue and a suggestion. I was actually going to suggest the opposite. So it seemed like when I was watching the video, everybody kind of had their own area of exploration. So I was wondering if it made sense for everyone to create the skeleton issues of what they discovered, what they think the next steps are, and then have kind of meet together to discuss maybe in office hours.
Yeah,
or
totally.
Tomorrow.
Yeah, feel free to remove that. Yeah, I'm fine with that. Totally.
No, I was going to ask everybody what they think. I won't be at the meeting, so I'm not waking up at 2 in the morning. So it's up to y'all. What do you think is the best approach? What do you want to do?
I think async with the with the topics that we mostly covered is probably like, let's try async. Let's do async if it's not working.
Okay.
Yeah, there's definitely some overlap though. Sorry?
Like you created this issue and it's, I mean, this jump in the memory, but it's due to memory Puma worker killer settings. And we actually have the issue assigned to this milestone to like revisit this memory worker killer settings to maybe increase that even more. But I'm kind of thinking that maybe as soon as we create these issues, maybe we actually may optimize some aspects to not increase these limits further instead of increasing the limits, because like this increase is like solely because of the 20% increase on the worker killer limit.
Ah, okay. All right. That explains a lot. Yeah, thanks.
It's also, I think, like looking at this graph, it also shows there's like around 20% difference increase between these releases. It's due to that.
Yeah, I saw discussion about it. Someone already asked why it happened.
Do you have an issue to link that might be interesting to track, just as like breadcrumbs?
We had a bug report, and I think Fabian also created release post item for the 13.6, adding this information. So you can also cross-link from there. There is like some expectation for us to set the limits to what we're running on the GitLab.com, which would increase these memory usage limits on-premise installation by another 20%, basically. And we need to make a decision how we approach it. Do we stay with the current limit? Do we maybe try to tune the default settings? Or do we decide to increase the limit again? And I believe this is probably like the most important issue for us to tackle and decide in this release.
On the bright side, it's a nice validation that our tracking works, because we should be seeing that spike.
Definitely.
Okay. I put a note in here for everybody to create their skeleton issues, and then we can review and groom async. I figure y'all can touch base tomorrow during office hours. And then I will go back and review the notes later on today, make sure I'm all caught up. I have some idea on areas of investigation, who did what, but I need to solidify my understanding of that. So what were you going to say, Matthias?
I agree though with what you said earlier. There is some overlap between, so we need to coordinate a little bit among ourselves, because there was some overlap in between the whole compaction stuff. And then there is this like special, I forgot what it was called, the Nakamura fork or something, like where there's like this special Puma mode or whatever.
Nakayoshi.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay. And then where it like also runs compaction. So it probably doesn't make sense to investigate both at the same time or create two issues for that. Or we can just, but I can catch up with Alexei around it when he's back.
I think Alexei like mostly covered Puma and Puma 5.0. He covered single 5.0 and like Nakayashi fork. I don't think that he also covered, I think, worker, refork worker.
Yeah, but I think it was part of, I think it's a Puma, maybe I misunderstood. I thought it's part of a Puma setting, a Puma 5 setting or feature that you can tell it to compact before it forks. Did I misunderstand?
So like Nakayashi fork, from what I understand, it doesn't really do compacting, it just runs garbage collection multiple times.
4 times. For some reason, I don't understand why, but it seems
it's just GCing. Okay, yeah, all right.
Nicola, like because why it runs multiple times, like when I was testing, because each garbage collection cycle is time limited, so you may free only like specific amount of the, let's say, slots in the given cycle. This is why you sometimes need to run multiple times to actually free and like mark and sweep.
Yeah, okay, fair enough, thanks. Yeah, I think for compaction, I think we should just do it because it's quite fast, and especially at the time before you fork, that is not a hot request path. So it's like if we lose a little bit of time there, that's not really a big deal. And I don't think it helps like in the long term over the lifetime of the application very much, but it has a temporary effect that looks beneficial. So it seems like it does more good than harm. So we can probably just do that.
I'm curious, this is probably an implementation detail that maybe we haven't figured out yet, but on this goal, whenever we get to whatever the shape of a 2 gig footprint looks like, are we going to make the installation and configuration of this smart, or is this going to be like, ask the user that's installing this and setting this up, are you trying to do this on limited resources?
Some things we can do automatically, like in Omnibus, for instance, we can, and that does not apply to .com then, but for Omnibus, we can at least look at the hardware, right, it runs on, or the VM, whatever it is, and ask like, how much memory do you have, or how many cores are available? And so we can create sensible defaults, at least, that are scaled with the available resources.
Okay.
So I like, we didn't really yet like validated all aspects. I mean, especially related to the GC tuning. But I'm assuming that like for the GC settings, likely they would be predefined and global, and they would affect 2G or like any other size install as well. So maybe like the Puma single being like the one setting that it's really hard to say if it should be like default or like should be smart or not smart. So this may be like some single setting like to use in this particular case.
And would you see this apply to all workloads? Like, would you have the same settings for Sidekick and Puma, for instance?
For the GC, from like my investigation, like I mean, like we discussed that I didn't get to the point of like trying all different combinations of the settings and their impact on the performance, because I would be looking at the Cartesian product of probably around 100 different tests to validate. But I would assume that, yes, like this should be like same defaults. I think like my understanding of looking at the current settings, understanding Ruby VM that I learned a lot, is that these settings that are configured today for every Ruby processes, they are not tuned to GitLab, basically. They are good defaults for generic application, but they are not good defaults for GitLab. So yes, please.
Continue. I just want to ask about extending Ruby VM. Is there a separate topic? I didn't look. I would like to see what you did there.
I created like these two patches so far.
Mm-hmm.
The Ruby VM. I'm not sure like what you're like exactly looking at, but if you are interested like in like, let's say, trying to add some new function with me and like seeing like how I'm doing that, we can jump on some call and like we can pair on that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thanks.
But like I so far added like 2 extensions to the C, which is like the application of the strings with updating references based on the compacting. And the second extension that I brought on Friday was like detailed stats on the pages to see exactly the compacting in effect and how
Yeah, I saw that.
How the content of the pages changes. And it was also pretty simple. I mean, like it's intimidating how big like this code is, like especially like gc.c and like how it behaves. But it's kind of, if you understand like a few concepts behind that, like behind the data structure, it's not really that hard. So I guess like if you're asking to add some new function that, for example, like copy on write of marking of pages and trying to discover when the given page was changed by the Ruby processes, I think I will be able to do it very quickly. It's not really that hard like to extend that. I mean, like it's hard like to really like, let's say, optimize the current code to the let's say to much better memory usage, because it's already pretty optimal. For example, there was like a moment that I looked to see opcodes, if like how we store the opcodes, but like all of that is pretty efficient in the way how it's written. So I also was looking at, can I mmap like the iSeq from a disk? And the answer is like, it's pretty challenging like to do it. So because of the like sheer size, it's pretty hard like to make a major differences. You rather like can do a hierarchical cut, fixing like very small aspect, and like this is the way iterating of that. But if you want to get a very detailed information about something, I mean dependency tree or something like that, it's fairly simple like to implement that.
Do you have time maybe during office hours tomorrow? Just give a super quick 15-minute demo, like a building your own Ruby. Doesn't it take like, how long does it take to build it if you have a custom patch that you want to test?
It doesn't really take a lot of, but it's pretty, I mean, like I didn't figure out yet exactly the best way like to build it. So far I was using Debian package to building. So I was like building the initial Debian package and commenting some aspects that I didn't want to do, and then like selectively compiling. And this was like my workflow so far. But it was pretty fast on that, if you talk. But like, I can show you exactly how I'm doing that. It's not really that complex.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I would love to give that a try as well. I haven't done it before.
I got to fall off here in a minute. I was going to say we could run through real quick and just throw out ideas on who's going to write up the issues if we want. So if anybody has an idea, like Matthias, if you know that the issues you're going to write up, we can list them out here so that we're not clashing. Or if that's not a good use of time, we can skip and just do that async and jump over to the image scaling topic that you've added.
You mean the issues that might overlap, or?
Yeah. Or just list, like if everybody has top of mind the issues that they're going to work on, we can list them out here. So make sure that
that's a good idea. We can do that async and just create a bullet pointed list here.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah.
All right. So your image scaling issue that came up.
Yeah. So I picked it up again today because we didn't really spent time on it last week. So it looks like the main reason that we keep breaching our SLO is because we have a data quality issue probably. So we have a bunch of PNGs that have corrupt chunks. But it's like part of the color space table or something that is encoded in the PNG, and the checksumming failed. So I both Golang and two tools I checked, they agree on like one image that I tested with. It was broken in that sense. And then if the PNG decoder will just fail when we try to read that image in the scaler. That is hard to fix. And I also don't know what the security implications are of stripping out CRCs, for instance. So I created an issue for that because we could do something like during upload, maybe we should just run PNG fix over every PNG that we upload to increase, because currently we just have a bunch of basically corrupt PNGs. They render fine, you know, if you bring them up, it's just like they're not integer, is that the word? I don't know. Yeah, so they cause problems. So I need to like check with Andrew again what the best way forward is. Fortunately, like he's working, I think we just need to lower our expectations for now, that we have a bunch of like bad data simply that we need to deal with. And he's working on rework of how we monitor SLOs that allows us a bit more fine-grained control, because currently they're all tied to the service level, not on the component level. So they basically all define the same thresholds. And that would allow us to have a image scaler component-specific way of tracking this, so that we can change our bars basically, right? And then we can say we allow more errors than the main workhorse component, for instance, that serves ordinary web requests, which I think is totally sensible. There have been other, it wasn't even just for image scaling, like he had been working on this because there were other components that they just have different error patterns, and you know, you have different expectations there. Yeah, so we might have to just silence that for another week or two.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't know, like these issues going forward, we should probably, because we have this handover issue still, is it still something we want to do this milestone, and to who? Because I'm not totally sure how to like go about this right now. And then we have a bunch of like issues that we will probably not work on, and this sounds like one of those probably.
Yeah, I'll work with Fabian on that to find out.
All right, cool.
Okay.
Yep, that's it. Thanks.
All right, I got the follow-up items here. So I'm going to go through 13.7 later on today. It looks like there's some issues that can either be closed or just kicked out entirely. And I'll make sure they're better representative of what we're working on for 13.7 as we add the 2 gig items in there. And then, for everybody else, adding issues for the 2 gig implementation goal. All right, any other topics for today?
I just forgot to mention the caching stuff. I'm looking at this as we speak, basically. So I'm just going to create the same spreadsheet that we had before to compare the, how many images are now served from client caches. So it should have a nice performance impact. But yeah, I'm not done. I just pulled the CDN logs, so gonna look at that today still.
Awesome. All right. If there's nothing else, I hope everybody has a good rest of their Monday.
Likewise. Bye-bye.
Happy Monday. See ya.